Next week on Zilog and Moto, I'm doing the 5th annual year in review video for the channel, where I take a look back at all of the games that I reviewed this year, and then over the last 5 years for that matter, to go over the best and worst that I've seen. And you know what, maybe even the most mediocre. I think that's going to have to be a new award that I hand out this year. Along with that, I usually also hand out some other awards as well, some humorous, some serious. It just kind of depends on how I'm feeling at the time. I always really enjoy doing this year in review video, and I'm grateful that I've been able to do Zilog and Moto now for 5 years for all of you, and I hope that you enjoy it as we're bringing 2023 to a close and kicking off 2024. However, I think this week I'm going to give out an award early. Actually, you know what? I'm going to give out 2 awards. Let's be generous. It is the holiday season after all for those of you that celebrate. Both awards relate to this week's game, and those awards are, drumroll please, Most Unlikely Title to be released by a publisher known for other things, and Most Unlikely Athlete to have a video game named after them, which would be Jennifer Capriati Tennis from Renovation? Yes, this is a very real game, and we're going to talk about it in just a second. Hi, my name is Dave, and welcome to Zilog and Moto, the channel where I'm out to collect and review not just sports games with questionable celebrity endorsements, only matched by the legendary Bill Lane beer, but also the nearly 1,280 other titles released in the English language for the Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega or Mega CD as the case may be, and finally the 32X. Basically, if I can plug it into a Sega Genesis either by itself or with some sort of add-on, and be able to read what's up on the screen, I'm trying to get a copy of it and review it for posterity, with both looks at that original packaging and gameplay captured from original hardware whenever possible. For the 3 or 4 tennis fans that are out there watching this video and that are mad that I'm crapping on Jennifer Capriati, first off, settle down and drink your Metamucil. And secondly, Bill Lane Beer's Combat Basketball was a Super Nintendo exclusive and therefore ineligible for this award. Sorry, those are the rules. I just work here. However, I do have legitimate reason for making that joke, and it has nothing to do with how well Jennifer could play tennis. You see, normally when someone gets asked, hey, do you want to make a lot of money by us using your name and likeness to sell a video game, they've done something special. For instance, a few weeks ago, when I was reviewing Mike Ditka Power Football, I spent a good 30 seconds or so recounting his accolades at the beginning of the video. And the same goes for some of the other sports stars that have had video games that I've covered on the channel. Say Joe Montana, John Madden, Tommy Lasorda, and Reggie Jackson, just to name a few. Jennifer Capriati, at least in the September of 1992 when the game was released in the United States, wasn't quite at that level. And to be completely fair to Jennifer, she was a fantastic tennis player and did win the gold medal in the Olympics in Barcelona just a few months prior to the game's release, so she was definitely no slouch. In fact, looking at this in 2023, having Jennifer as the star of the game looks to be a wise move, as she would eventually win 2 Australian Opens and the French, along with being the #1 player in the world, but those things would not occur until 2001. So why did Renovation put Jennifer Capriati on the cover of the game? And more importantly, is it any good? Well, we'll talk about all that and more, but first, a look at the package. And this is my copy of Jennifer Capriati Tennis for the Genesis. I didn't pick this copy up until sometime in the last year or so, as like most Renovation Products releases, it's not terribly common, even with it being a sports title. If you're not familiar with Renovation Products, they were the US publishing arm of Nihon Telenet, basically meaning that they were responsible for translating Telenet's Japanese Mega Drive releases in the United States. For instance, the Valis series and Ernest Evans, to name a few. The Renovation Telenet releases have a reputation of being decent quality, and with them being earlier third-party releases for the Genesis, all arriving between 1990 and 1992, the combination of those two factors make them uncommon and fairly sought after. I remember trying to pick this one up at the Midwest Gaming Classic earlier last year, or the year before, and when I went to go look at it, the person at the booth joked, it's the cheapest of the Renovation titles, because at the time their games could easily average in the triple digits for complete copies. Of course, that particular copy didn't have the manual, so I left it behind and then picked up this one later. On the surface, it appears to be in decent shape, and since you hardly ever see it, I went ahead and jumped on it. However, in doing this review, I've found out that that may have been a mistake. You see, I was looking closely at it so I could talk about its condition, and I noticed just how nice the inner cover looked. Too nice, in fact. I'm going to go ahead and pull this out now. 1 second here. Okay, so I'm not sure if this will come across on the video, but the first tell is the paper itself. It's too thick. This is a thicker photo stock, like what you would use with an inkjet printer, as opposed to the thinner stock that was traditionally used on these inserts. Then, if you look very closely at the cover and certain graphical elements, you can see where it's blurry and even pixelated in places. So clearly, someone didn't have an original case for this game and instead just came up with this instead to try to make a few more bucks. If you're doing this for yourself, I certainly don't have a problem with it, but don't sell these, or at very least, clearly label it as a repro. Anyway, as much as I'm annoyed about this, I am glad that I found out, and thankfully I was able to find a replacement on eBay for $35 that looked to be in similar good shape, so that's on the way. As far as this front cover goes, it's not great. It's a picture of Jennifer looking far older than the 16 years of age that she was here, and then the logo in bright yellow at the bottom. It certainly stands out, like most Renovation covers do, but not necessarily in a good way. And that yellow at the bottom is very subject to sun bleaching, so good luck with that if you do try to find your own copy. In Europe and Japan, the game didn't feature the Jennifer Capriati licensing and was instead known as GrandSlam, the tennis tournament. And with that, we've got the following artwork. And I think in this case, I've got to give this one to the European version, in what looks like could pass for a fantasy game cover, but just replace the guy's sword with a tennis racket. Flipping over the back, and even with this being a repro, the screenshots still look pretty good, with definitely a different look than, say, Andre Agassi Tennis has. The flavor text isn't particularly memorable, but it does try to let you know who Jennifer Capriati is and what the point of the game is, so that's decent. I do like how clearly it doesn't have any licensing though, so when it's referring to the tennis majors, it says things like the London Open and Paris Open instead of Wimbledon and French Open. But it appears their geography is a bit off, as the Australian Open is held in Melbourne, not Sydney, and the US Open is held in New York, not Florida. Seems to be a bit of an unforced error on their part. Alright, sorry, that was terrible. Opening up the package, the manual has seen a bit of wear and may have gotten a bit damp at some point, but thankfully it's held up, because it is a great looking manual. The game of tennis here is presented isn't terribly complicated, but Renovation went above and beyond, and there are so many graphics and pictures here. This is one of the best graphic designs for a manual that I've seen the entire time that I've done the channel, so props to them for that. And I especially like the breakdowns of all 24 players included in the game at the end. Okay, that's the unfortunately not authentic package. Let's get to the game and see if it hopefully plays well enough to make me forget about that last bit. I've always enjoyed tennis video games, going back to what I would consider the first real one that I ever played, on-court tennis on the Commodore 64. Something about the back and forth action and the simplicity of the game usually made it easier to represent in a virtual version. Usually. Unfortunately, so far on Zilog and Moto, I've only had the chance to review 2 tennis titles, namely being Andre Agassi Tennis for the Genesis and the Master System in episodes 73 and 173 respectively. And if you haven't seen those episodes, well, let's just say that my reaction to either version was not a positive one, with the Genesis version being especially disappointing and probably still ending up on my worst of Zilog and Moto list that will be part of next week's end of the year video. So when I picked out Jennifer Capriati Tennis this week, I was definitely intrigued. Sure, as mentioned, she was a somewhat odd choice to name the game after from an accolade standpoint, but she was also A, American, B, young, and C, successful, even if she hadn't actually won a major yet, making it to the semifinals of both Wimbledon and the US Open the year before in 1991. But to me, more interesting is the fact that the game came from Renovation, aka Telenet, And honestly, with that developer pedigree, I didn't really care who was or wasn't on the cover. With their reputation, I was very curious to see what they could do with a sports title. When booting up the game, you have a few different options. The first option is Exhibition Mode, which can be either a single or doubles match. For singles play, it can either be a pretty standard one-on-one game against the computer, or against a second player, or you can have the computer play itself if you just want to sit back and watch the action. I'm not really sure why anyone would actually do that in a game that doesn't feature licensed players, but hey, it's still included nonetheless. Doubles mode is much the same, but now, for two-player mode, you also have the option of either having each player partner with a computer, or teaming up against two computer players. In these exhibition modes, you can choose a matchup between any of the 12 included men or women, including Jennifer, or perhaps one of the 4 custom-made players, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. With each player having different statistics and preferences, you can select matchups and get some good practice, and see what happens when a player whose strengths lie in close to the net play versus a baseline specialist, or perhaps someone who's just an average all-around player. If you don't want to try to practice in an actual match, the game also features a training mode. In training mode, it's basically you against your coach, and you have a few different options for setting up your coach and what type of scenario you want to get repetitions on. I don't think most people will probably spend a whole lot of time here, but it's still nice that they included it because it can be frustrating to try to practice in a live match with the constant court rotation that occurs every 2 games. After playing some exhibition matches and doing some training, what if you don't like any of the 24 base characters presented? Well, in that case, Jennifer Capriati Tennis has a custom character mode that allows you to create up to 4 additional male and female characters for a total of 16 on each side. The character creator is actually somewhat robust, allowing for the choosing of the sex of the character. You can also choose one of 3 races, the color of the clothes that they are wearing, a few different options as far as their tennis swing goes, and then finally you're able to spend 12 points in 4 different categories to really specialize your character and what type of play you want to specialize in on the court, and just how you want to balance speed versus power. For a game from 1992, I'm actually somewhat impressed because other sports franchises wouldn't really have this level of character customization in games for a few more years. The only caveat here is that while you can create a bunch of characters and have them compete in tournaments to raise their rank and possibly become champion, the game doesn't feature battery backup. So if you want to use your character later, you will have to check for and enter the password associated for that character every time you start the game. It's not the end of the world, but battery backup would have been really nice here. Another place where battery backup would have been appreciated is in the final game mode, which is the circuit option, and the main meat and potatoes of the game. Circuit is pretty much what it sounds like, with you choosing a player and then attempting to win the Sydney Open, the Paris Open, the London Open, and finally the Florida Open. To do this, you choose a character, either one of the base 12 or a custom, and then it's off to compete in each of the 4 Opens consecutively, with each Open having a quarter-final random draw, meaning that you have to win 3 matches per tournament to then win the Open and move on to the next event. I like this as a nice basic setup to have something similar to a season mode in other sports titles, but there's just 2 problems. The first you probably guessed with my intro to this section, and that's that there is no battery backup available to save your progress through the various Opens, which is kind of a problem considering that means you have to win 12 matches in a row to win the championship. The password option mentioned above can be used to continue your progress through circuit mode. However, you only get a password when you lose in an Open, and that password only returns you to the beginning of that Open, not necessarily where you left off if you were in the semifinal or the final. I suppose at least the password continue option exists, but it's not exactly optimal. This leads into the second problem with circuit mode, which is somewhat of a blessing and a curse depending on how you look at it. In circuit mode, every match is only 1 set. For those of you familiar with tennis in real life, you probably know that in majors, women's matches are best of 3 sets and men's matches are best of 5. So only having single set matches feels a bit odd. The strange thing is that in exhibition mode, you can choose either single set or best of 3 matches, so the option to have at least best of 3 for circuit mode was there, it just wasn't utilized.
It's not a huge deal, and it does make progression through circuit mode go quicker, with a complete run to the championship able to be completed in 2 hours as is, but it would have been nice to at least have had the option to have longer games. As far as the gameplay goes in Jennifer Capriati Tennis, it's pretty solid, and what I expect from a tennis game, which means that it's light years ahead of the incredibly poor and frustrating controls that plagued Andre Agassi Tennis. And with Andre Agassi Tennis coming out 3 months after this, it makes the game look even that much worse by comparison. Essentially, each player has 3 different serves that they can utilize with either the A, B, or C button, and then also 3 different shots when volleying returns. For serves, the B serve is the most powerful, while the A and C serves are safer, which leads to a situation that you see all the time in real tennis, where a player commits a fault on their first serve, and then they have to think, do they risk double faulting and try to hammer in the high-powered serve again? Or do something safer just to get the ball into play and try to win the point on volleys? It's a small detail, but I really appreciated its inclusion in the game as it made the game feel more authentic. I mentioned earlier that since each player could have a different specialty or configuration, not everyone plays the same, so you may have to do some trial and error to find a player that you like. However, when I went through this, I found that even when I had a player that I liked, I still found myself struggling to keep the ball in bounds when going for shots to the left and right lines. And I don't mean that I was on the right side and I mistakenly hit it right, which of course would go out because I was already so far over. I mean that I could be on the right side and try to hit it to the left to position the ball away from the opponent, and it would still go out of bounds. I liked the fact that the game was competitive, and the controls appeared to be doing what they were supposed to be doing, but things still seemed a bit on the tough side. Thankfully, the developers included a cheat mode in the game, with cheat being completely in quotation marks, that can be entered in the password screen, which allows you to change a few different difficulty options along with providing a sound test. This allowed me to drop the difficulty down, and I magically started making shots and winning games. And I definitely recommend players give this a look if they're struggling. However, I just have to wonder, why was this presented as a cheat code? It seems like a traditional options screen that really should have just been available from the start of the game, along with all the other modes. I'm definitely glad it was included, as being able to drop the difficulty completely changed my enjoyment and overall opinion of the game, but knowing that people probably struggled with the game back in the day because they didn't have it, well, that's a miss. The graphics in Jennifer Capriati Tennis are simpler and give off more of an 8-bit feel, but they're not bad, and in fact, I'm impressed with the smoothness of how the players move around the court and how the ball looks as it moves around on the screen, with the ball getting larger and smaller depending on where it is in relation to the camera, similar to what we've seen in soccer titles on the channel. Also, while the background and players may not be as detailed as they are in other titles, the actual playfield is larger, which helps the game play better, so I'm okay with that trade-off. The sound, on the other hand, is more of a mixed bag. The small amount of background music that gets played during the various menu screens is solid, but as it's a tennis game, during actual matches, you won't hear any of that, leaving just the included sound effects. Some effects, like strokes and the bounce of the ball, are quite good, but then the digital speech of the chair umpire is pretty rough, and the crowd noise sounds like it was lifted straight from an early Master System title. Considering that the entire game is packed into just a 4 megabit cartridge, it's understandable why the speech and the crowd noise is so rough, but that doesn't necessarily make it pleasant. Overall, I enjoyed my time playing Jennifer Capriati Tennis, especially once I figured out that difficulty could be adjusted. It's not a perfect game to be sure, and I would say that it's my favorite tennis game that I've reviewed on the channel so far, but seeing as how that the only other tennis games that fall into that category are the 2 versions of Andre Agassi Tennis, that's not exactly saying very much. As a result of all the game modes that are included, how well the game plays, and even bonuses like the additional players that can be challenged if you manage to complete circuit mode, I'm giving Jennifer Capriati Tennis 3 stars. While it's entirely possible that later tennis titles on the Genesis are better overall games, in 1992, this was easily the best tennis that was available on the console.
Okay, and that is it for Jennifer Capriati Tennis on the Genesis, or perhaps GrandSlam the tennis tournament if you are not in the United States. I think this was a really solid way to close out game reviews for year 5 on the channel. While it was not an amazing game, it is solidly above average, and it was nice to finally break the seal on Renovation Products games. I've still got a few of them I gotta track down, but based on this, I am definitely looking forward to being able to review some of their other games on the channel and see if they all deserve to be as expensive and in demand as they are. Next time on Zilog and Moto, it's the 5th annual end of the year retrospective on the channel, where I don't specifically review any game or games. Instead, I look back on the channel and go over not just what I've worked on for the past year in 2023, but also everything that has been a part of the channel since February 17th, 2019, that fateful day that I uploaded my first video here. This end of the year video is always one of my favorites to put together because instead of just focusing on one game, I get to put together some top 10 lists, which of course YouTube loves for whatever reason, and then I also get to hand out some awards. Some humorous and some a bit more legit, but most of all, I get to reflect on how far things have come and how appreciative I am of all of you out there that watch these things and keep me going. Hopefully you'll tune in and we'll see if I start any arguments down in the comments. Well, that is it for Zilog and Moto episode 223. Wow. If you like what you saw here and want to see more, please think about liking and subscribing if you are so inclined, as it will help more people see these videos. But most importantly, whatever you like to play, have fun and be excellent to each other. Later.